can only hope that this recording reaches someone with a conscience. My employer has become obsessed with a loathsome idea. This experiment should never have been conceived. I'm afraid the damage will be staggering. At this point, it's unavoidable. But I didn't have a choice. If I didn't do this, it could have destroyed the entire world. Whoever is watching this, please, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The shadows that were amassed here have been dispersed as a result of the explosion. In order to end this, you have no choice but to eliminate all of them. I am the one responsible for this. I knew the risks, but I was blinded by the promise of success, and so I chose to continue without objections. I am responsible.
Persona 3 Reload is definitely one of the best remakes I've ever played, up there with the Final Fantasy VII remakes and Resident Evil 1, 2, and 4. We don't count the third one. The fact that this remake even exists is a miracle on its own, as this is something people have been asking for just so many years at this point, only for it to be heightened with the release of the dancing games, and for the first time, Atlus would bring forth high-quality 3D models of the Persona 3 cast and setting. Rumor after rumor on whether this game would ever exist would float around over the years until it would literally split apart the community into one half thinking the remake of Persona 3 will come soon, and the other half completely shutting down any hope of Atlus ever going through with the remake and just milking Persona 5 some more. Whether Persona 3 FES actually needed a remake or not is honestly still up for debate, as I think Persona 3 FES is still a very enjoyable game, but I always wanted to see a true definitive remake of this game anyway. As most of you probably know, there are two versions of Persona 3, one being Persona 3 FES for the PS2, which added an additional story called The Answer, which serves as a direct sequel of the ending of Persona 3, and Persona 3 Portable for the PSP, featuring a playable female protagonist. Portable would come in later than FES, but due to the PSP's limited capabilities, it lacked cutscenes, a 3D world, and is just generally seen as a second choice when people choose to play Persona 3. There is some more stuff between the two, but that's the main gist of the both of them. And a remake of this game would hope to fuse both elements of Portable and elements of FES into one game, while also patching out some features and adding more quality of life changes. Alongside how stylish and clean modern Atlus games look now, a lot of people wanted to see this game remade in a definitive version with all additions from FES and Portable in one game. And what we ended up getting was not that at all. This remake would actually be a vanilla remake to the original Persona 3, so the female protagonist of Portable and the Answer of FES expansion would actually not be coming with the remake, unfortunately. Though the Answer was at least announced as DLC, so at least we're getting something. Unfortunately, it's an extra $40. But after all these years of rumors and speculation and high hopes, the remake would finally be released on February 2nd, 2024. And well, just how good is Persona 3 Reload? Persona 3 Reload is a faithful remake in its story, but still adds so much to the setting and characters of Persona 3 to where some aspects almost feel new. It may sound like an exaggeration, but there is so much more personality with the characters that the moody and dreadful atmosphere just doesn't feel so prominent in every single moment like it normally is in Persona 3. Interestingly enough, I see this as a positive but also a very slight negative in terms of how the remake handled the characters. Just for context, Persona 3 is the only game within Neo Persona to have a cast of characters who slowly open up to each other through story progression. In Persona 4 and 5, the cast would awaken to their second and third Persona tiers through social links and forming bonds through the main character. In Persona 3, the cast would awaken to their higher tiers through their own resolve in the story, whether it's by the loss of someone important to them or through coming to terms with yourself and who you are. I'm not going to delve too deep into these just yet because almost every single resolution within these characters is within major spoiler territory. But through all this in the original games, it gave characters time and space to become comfortable with each other and get to know one another. This was just a great approach going through Persona 3 solely because it felt as if things happened outside of the main character. It's one of the problems I have with Persona 5, as it feels as if the characters are good friends but didn't really have a tight bond outside of the main character Joker. Persona 4 did this pretty well with the cast having good friendship dynamics within the friend group like Chie and Yukiko, Yosuke and Teddy, and even Rise and Kanji surprisingly. The C's cast of Persona 3 would naturally become closer throughout the game, but in the beginning they more so felt like coworkers than an actual friend group, with some characters even slightly resenting each other. But over time they would get all along and become better friends and spend more time with each other throughout the game. For the main cast of characters, you can really only have social links with the female party members of the group, and the only way to have the male social links would be by playing through Persona 3 Portable, by playing through the female protagonist specifically. Since Femc is basically confirmed that they are not coming to Reload, I was a little worried that outside of the female social links there wouldn't be any other way to connect with the other parts of the cast. And that's where these little activity events would come in. This would be one of the bigger changes of the remake, where you can spend time with the cast doing activities catered towards their interests and personalities. And it's pretty nice as it seamlessly progresses with the events going on in the main story, and sometimes it even addresses certain situations from their own point of view. Akihiko is one character that had a lot of aspects about his parents that weren't really touched up on, but thanks to the hangout events at night, he would open up a lot about his foster care parents. Mitsuru, for example, would enjoy drinking tea and reading books, Yukari would practice her cooking and also enjoy scary horror movies, Fuka would enjoy gardening and reading, and Junpei would also enjoy gardening and also reading manga. Shinjiro would enjoy gardening and cooking, and Akihiko would also enjoy watching boxing matches and cooking. Ken would enjoy watching movies and drinking coffee, and Aigis would enjoy gardening and reading Yakuza magazines. They would also give you little stat increases as well. While some of these may seem a bit out of place at first, they all would actually benefit the cast extremely well, as they do flesh out parts of the characters that hasn't really been touched up on before. Shinjiro would probably be one of the best examples of this, as these social linked episodes and dorm events would do wonders for his character and show parts of him that hasn't been seen before. Shinjiro is one character that I feel is left in the dark a bit in the original Persona 3, yet is one of the most beloved characters in Reload. His linked episode would be about his early relationships with Akihiko and Mitsuru, and it would be so unbelievably good that I ended up wanting more out of this trio than I would have expected. It would start out from when they were younger, going into detail of how the three of them became friends and how they even promised to all graduate together with nobody left behind. Spoiler alert for the month of October and so on. Ever since the accident 2 years ago with Shinjiro's persona going berserk and murdering someone, he would leave the team and loathe the idea of ever using his persona again. Mitsuru would even describe it as self-punishment for what happened. This would lead to him not attending his classes and basically becoming a dropout, but this was all information that we knew. The linked episode would go more in depth with how Seize started, and how it was only originally 3 members, being Mitsuru, Akihiko, and Shinjiro. With the 3 of them being so young and inexperienced, they would barely even be able to make it past the entrance to Tartarus, which really shows just how far they've come up to this point. He would also express his concerns for Ken, as he knows just how hard it is for Ken to grow up and be so young without any parents. Mitsuru, in hopes to rekindle the bond with her old friend, would make the main character Makoto deliver him re-enrollment letters to come back to school, and hopefully have him rejoin the group somehow. With a few hangout events with Shinjiro and conversations with Mitsuru and Akihiko, even you would start to root for their trio friendship to come back. You'd get a strong sense of their original connection and Mitsuru's more vulnerable side, as she would speak more about the original trio. Shinjiro coming back to school would not only show that he still cares about their original promise, but also that they meant something to him. He would eventually tell you that he has zero plans on returning back to school, and he almost fully committed to not returning back to the group entirely, as the pills he's been taking to suppress his persona would lead to his death, so there would have been no point. This would lead on to October 4th, where Shinjiro would unfortunately die protecting Ken, seemingly with no regrets. After his death, there would be one final part to end off the linked episode, and it would lead to you going into his room and finding an incomplete form for his school to return from his absence. Shinjiro's mask was pretty deep, but this was undeniable proof that he actually cared for the people around him. Throughout the entire event, he would open up to Makoto a lot solely because he was the only one to get Shinjiro to open up and remember the people who cared about him. This would do such an amazing job at developing a stronger bond between the main character and Shinjiro, and also delving deeper into the bond of the original trio. And with everything that happens with Shinjiro later on, it makes this storyline all the more valuable. All of the social linked episodes would elevate the characters immensely, with all of them having some unexpected deeper connection regarding to the character's past. Alongside the social linked episodes would be dorm activities, which include other small hangout events like study sessions before the midterms and cooking events with certain characters. The study sessions were some of my favorites, as they were a great addition because of just how long it would take to max up your knowledge stats. Alongside the study group sessions within the cast, they would all feature some surprisingly good dialogue between all of them, and it was always extremely fun to watch it play out. Sometimes it would be the entire team, and other times it would just be a few characters, but they surprisingly ended up being some of my favorite minor hangout events that you have access to. Though all of these additions, I have to admit, are genuinely amazing and extremely appreciated, the only small nitpick that I have is just how I feel as if the atmosphere is very different than the original. Persona 3 Reload is objectively a brighter and lighter game within its atmosphere and just doesn't feel as it did in the original at times. For reference, just look at the scene within the Yakushima trip in Fez versus the Yakushima trip in Reload. Alongside all of the new additions, the cast just feels friendlier and more connected. I think Persona 3 worked with something called the Hedgehog effect, and I feel as if the original games did a good job at showing this extremely well, where the cast did not want to break down their inner walls as it may cause emotional pain within one another. Evangelion displayed the message as the closer we become, the deeper we hurt each other, describing the human struggle to form intimate relationships while avoiding the pain and hurt of rejection. This was extremely apparent within Persona 3 as the characters were always off doing their own thing and staying to themselves. Ken, Akihiko, Mitsuru, and characters like Junpei seemed more interesting in accomplishing their own desires and ending the Dark Hour, rather than becoming close friends like the investigation team of Persona 4. With Reload, it brings so many new aspects of character dynamics that it feels as if only some characters would stay to themselves. Of course, this isn't a major issue, it's just different than how the original game felt, and initially I wanted them to do something similar to Burn My Dread as an opening, but honestly, I don't think that would ever be as fitting given that Reload doesn't have that heavy, consistent tone that Burn My Dread would complement. But once again, this is more so seen as minor criticism towards the remake, simply because a lot of these additions I wouldn't say are super overbearing in any way. But through all of this, the characters would be amazing in their own right, with so much more depth within their past and personalities. I can really only wish that Atlus would continue these deeper character bonds within Persona 6, hopefully with more relations outside of the main character as well. The scenery of the game would also have a major upgrade within Reload, as everything would feel so much more alive. Tatsumi Port Island is very vibrant and so much more lively than it was in the original. And even within the nighttime, there would be tons of people within the station and mall, which really helps the city feel like a city. It would also have one of my favorite songs from the soundtrack, and arguably one of the best songs in the game, being Color Your Night. This song alone was enough to get me anticipating Reload solely for its soundtrack. I was the guy listening to those videos on YouTube of people trying to perfect the song before it was even out. It's the Persona 3 alternative to Beneath the Mask for me. As for the music of the game, it was seemingly going to be a bit controversial, as they would have removed the most iconic singer of the original games, being Yumi Kawamura. Not sure exactly why they did this, but I guess they wanted a fresh new voice for the music, as there would be a lot of changes within Reload anyway. The new singer, Azumi Takahashi, does a really good job in the soundtrack of Reload, while also giving some of the music her own little spin. It keeps the spirit of Persona 3 alive, while also having this undeniably fresh feel to it. Some of my favorites from her in the soundtrack is, of course, Color Your Night, Changing Seasons, and the battle theme. Oh my god. I remember when the second big trailer dropped and they had this song playing as a theme, and I could not have been more excited. It's Going Down Now sounds like a celebration of Persona 3. It perfectly encapsulates the vibe of Persona 3 while also feeling distinctly fresh in the delivery of the song. It doesn't even sound much like a basic battle theme to me, but something that would be used for a significant battle. I always felt like Persona 3 had more of a disrespectful, punkish swing to its vocals, and it's heavily emphasized through the Lotus Use part of the song, which is really cool. Mass Destruction is an iconic battle theme from the original game that people absolutely love, and a lot of people were pretty disappointed when they heard the recreation of it by its new singer, Azumi Takahashi. I personally thought it was fine, but also her voice did grow on me the more I played the game, so yeah. Even though I greatly appreciate this new singer, I still do find myself missing the original soundtrack as well, as it's very special in its own right. Both versions are amazing, but I really do appreciate Atlas for trying something new and having a new singer deliver the music. And all of this would be backed up by its insanely cool water aesthetic that is basically everywhere in this game. Though with the visuals of Persona 3 FES, it did mean to emulate the visuals of water and the ocean. It was just less defined. Reload definitely took a few pointers from Persona 5, but Reload's UI isn't as flashy. But like the original, UI aesthetics are a bit more low-key and sleek, and not overbearing in any way. And even the all-out attacks have a pretty cool end screen on them, and looks amazing while also being slightly minimal. Not to mention just how good the overall style of combat and transitions are, speaking of which holds the best aspect of Reload in my opinion. So the gameplay of Persona 3 Reload is one aspect of the game with the most changes. First and foremost would be Tartarus. Tartarus is the main dungeon of Persona 3 and has been that way since the original. But one of the biggest critiques within the original would be how Tartarus is bland and uninspired, with each floor just being repetitive and annoying to go through. And it didn't really help with the dungeon being the only one in the game and also having 264 floors total. While this may sound like literally the worst design ever, I personally really love Tartarus. It's nothing like the intuitive and personalized designs of the palaces of Persona 5, but it's very simplistic yet enjoyable. While it may be 264 floors, it's also separated by blocks, and there are 6 blocks in total, and each block is open depending on which part of the story you're on. The music also changes within Tartarus, adding a new instrument to the music with every block, and it would go from this eerie sound in block 1 to this triumphant and celebratory theme in block 6, which just sounds amazing. In Reload, the music would stay the same, but the entire aesthetics of the dungeon has a complete overhaul, and I absolutely love this. From block 1, there honestly isn't too much of a difference. Reload is just obviously more vibrant and pretty because of the new engine, but for something like block 2, the differences are much more apparent, with the deep purple hues and vines laid out all over the walls. The difference between block 2 in FES and block 2 in Reload is very apparent, and this would continue to go on to other blocks as well, with Reload even adding a bit more in terms of the design of every block. Something like block 3, for example, would even have changes within the architecture as you pass by it. But the main appeal of Tartarus was never within the layout of the dungeon or even within its design, but honestly the mid-bosses. These were honestly the real fun of the grind. The random encounters were nothing special of course, and surprisingly the full moon bosses of the game were pretty lackluster to an extent. Although I did really love the Love Hotel and Wheel of Fortune full moon boss, as they were just a really good switch up in terms of the formula. The mid-bosses were more so seen as checkpoint bosses, whenever you would reach a certain level of Tartarus. It allowed the player to have a goal to reach within each block and either take the checkpoint and return for the night, or fight the mid-boss and continue to explore Tartarus. And again, the mid-bosses are no joke, making it even harder to decide whether it's worth it to continue fighting. From even the first 3 mid-bosses of the game, there is a challenge, and it may not be so bad for some veterans of the series, but they would still be pretty annoying. In Reload, the mid-bosses would still be there and they would be called Floor Guardians. The same concepts would still apply to these mid-bosses, but given the upgraded gameplay of Persona 3 Reload, these mid-bosses just wouldn't be as challenging to fight. Reload would incorporate a new mechanic called shifting. Basically what it is when you hit a weakness on the enemy, you get an extra turn as that character, but shifting would allow you to give that turn to another party member of your choice. It's the same concept as Persona 5's baton passing, except instead of high-fiving each other, they would give each other a slight head nod. The only problem that I had with this was the fact that due to these mechanics in gameplay, finding a challenge within this game was very rare. and it can be pretty hard to find a challenge when you can essentially just ping pong your enemies and boom them with an all-out attack. And even if I sound like the biggest Persona 3 Fez glazer ever, I really love the tactics menu so much more than controllable party members. It was one of my favorites from Persona 3's gameplay, and because there was so much to choose from in the menu, only by knowing the strong suits of each character would you be able to use this menu correctly, by making each character do what they do best. My party consisted of Yukari for healing, Mitsuru for some hard damage, and Akihiko for a bit of both, and so on and so forth. But I of course love the controllable party as well. It just takes out a little bit of the strategy that I was used to. But outside of all of this, there is one mechanic that I absolutely loved at first, but does slowly turn reload into easy mode. 2 blocks into Tartarus, and Yukari would be the first member to unlock something called Theurgy. It's essentially a super move that the characters will have access to that'll deal massive amounts of damage and pierce through resistances. When going through Tartarus, each one of your party members will have a meter, and it essentially goes up no matter what, but it is accelerated when the member uses a move that they specialize in. My main team consisted of Yukari, Mitsuru, and Aigis, and Yukari would accelerate by healing, Mitsuru would accelerate by ailment attacks, and Aigis would accelerate by using physical attacks, and etc. And when the bar is full, you'd be able to use a flashy attack where your party member would deal massive amounts of damage. It would only deplete if you were to use your Theurgy or if you were to leave Tartarus. And these animations are such a highlight for every single character. They're easily the flashiest animations in the game, and display the character's abilities and personality with every single Theurgy. For the protagonist Makoto, his Theurgy attacks would just be the fusion spells, which is a pretty smart way of going about that from the original. Where as long as you have the right personas registered, you can use the fusion spell Theurgys, unlike the original where you had to have both personas in your persona stocks to use them. Some of my favorites would definitely have to be the Electric Onslaught from Akihiko, Junpei's Blaze of Life, and Aigis' Maximum Firepower. Oh my god, that one's good. Honestly, I think everyone's second Theurgy is just so amazing. Unfortunately, with just how fast you can build up your Theurgy with some of these characters, it would just lead to you building up your Theurgy and then literally destroying the next floor guardian when you come across them. Some bosses would literally not even pose a challenge because you would just have everyone's Theurgy completely maxed out from the start, and you would just buff and debuff before completely wailing on them.
Let's go! Take that! One last touch!
Delivery! Just for you!
I have to do this. Hooray! Hurry, knocked down 2 enemies! You take it from here.
I'll go with Sasha!
I'll hit them where it hurts. How about this? You have no effect? Last one! Let's finish this!
This work. Let's go!
Hold on! Sonata-senpai's panicking! Kirito-senpai's distressed!
Come!
That's a win for the
Hardly
team!
worth our time.
Good job, everyone!
The gameplay of Reload, while not perfect, is pretty enjoyable. I'm not sure if I like it more than the original, but both are pretty solid in their own right. Reload is definitely easier, but it does come with more variety, while the original is harder, but it's also more strategic in my opinion. I also just really love Tartarus. I always really enjoyed it, but I feel like they just did a really good job with Reload's version. After Block 2 in the original, I feel as if nothing really changes that much in Tartarus besides the scenery and music, but in Reload there's a bit more effort to keep it fresh. The aesthetics are more vibrant, the layout is more dynamic, and they would introduce the Monad Doors and Monad Passage alongside a Greed Shadow minigame for a bunch more XP. The Monad Doors are a pretty cool addition, where you can randomly find these doors within the dungeon and fight bosses for rewards. Not gonna lie though, the rewards are usually kind of ass. You can occasionally find a cool gem that you can use at the antique store for new weapons or armor though. Then at the end of the block you would find the final Monad Passage, where you would fight a series of bosses for an even better reward. Overall pretty solid and enjoyable. But outside of the new additions, how does Reload interpret Persona 3 as a remake? This is something that people were slightly worried about since Persona 3 was developed in a time where everything was darker and edgier. Atlus hasn't lost their touch over the years, but with how games have developed over time, heavy dark tones regarding life and death are just not commonly depicted with fiction anymore. And the amount of edge that Persona 3 had was heavily backed up by its amazing themes and messages, which stayed with the fandom much after their playthrough with Persona 3, which is why a remake was so sought after within the last 10 years. People wanted Persona 3 remade, but in a more modern engine to re-experience the story and themes. So how does Reload do in regards to this, and is it enhanced by any means, or did they add too much to the point where it ruined the original vibe of the game? Persona 3 Reload as a whole does a really good job of bringing the story to modern day. While there are some changes within the direction, some good and some bad, there isn't enough to completely change the core message and story a whole lot. All of the new hangout events, as mentioned before in the video, are amazing, but they do take away a little bit of the mysterious and closed off vibe the characters would give off. But there were some really hard-hitting additions like Shinjiro's linked episode, which really gave depth within the original relationship of the group, alongside my gripes with the characters being a little too happy. For those of you who have played the original or know of it even a little bit, you may have realized just how gloomy the cast actually is. This may not be something everyone would like, but given the circumstances that they were in and all of the massive challenges that they faced throughout their lives and the game, I feel like this was the only way to write these characters. And the way they would slowly open up throughout the game and become more comfortable with you and the rest of the cast, it worked really well in showing the progression of everyone becoming friendlier and closer together. Persona 3 Reload has reintroduced itself to modern fans in a different style that just doesn't hit as hard as its PS2 counterpart. I haven't even mentioned just how some of the cutscenes are just not as good as the original, solely because Reload chooses for so much more in-engine cutscenes than animated ones. The first cutscene of Makoto awakening his persona in Fez speaks volumes louder than the awakening in Reload, simply because the animated cutscene was just so much more stylistic and impressive than its Reload counterpart. For me, the remake is definitely flawed, but Atlus is also just not as dark as they were during their PS2 run. Still, while this could have been a better remake, Persona 3 Reload is still extremely highly regarded and well received, and for good reason. I feel like we're entering an Atlus remake era with Persona 3 Reload just being the start to it. And with how well this did, I feel like there's a really good chance of us getting remakes for the lesser known SMT titles, and I'm praying for a Raito remake. But also a possible Persona 1 and 2 in modern day could be pretty interesting. Though I feel like the most obvious answer for another remake is going to more than likely be none other than the beloved Persona 4, which also happens to be my favorite game of all time. But we do still at least have episode Aigis to look forward to, since that is releasing very soon. The issues that I do have with Reload will still most likely affect episode Aigis in terms of the gameplay and design, but the one thing that I will at least never have to worry about is just how hard Atlus will deliver with its battle themes.
So far the worst, but the worst has yet to come. And I don't do this to me now, I'm going numb.
Do not make me lost my keys to the door while you shine. Only had one wish, now it's never gonna come true. Trapped in time.
now is not the right time for anything, so stop loading.
Stay away from me. Already lost my keys to the door wide shut. Only had one wish. Now it's never gonna come true. Trapped in time, forever in remorse. How could I ever be in this when nothing else matters to me?
If you want a battle, then I take it to the street. Win or defeat, it's in.